I want you to think about the life you're living right now, like the literal day-to-day reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to ask yourself a very fundamental, maybe slightly uncomfortable question. Who actually wrote the script for the role you're playing today?
That is, well, that's a heavy one to start with.
Right. But think about it. I mean, think about the way you dress for work, or think about the cadence of your voice when you're speaking in a meeting versus, the persona you adopt when you're at a family gathering.
Oh, yeah, the family gathering voice is always different.
Exactly. Or when you're out with your oldest friends. Did you consciously design that character from the ground up?
Yeah.
With total absolute intentionality?
Probably not.
No. Or did society just, hand you a script the moment you were born and you've just been dutifully reading the lines ever since?
It's a profound question, and to be honest, it's usually the kind of question that makes people quite defensive.
Oh, for sure.
Because we all desperately want to believe that we are, completely authentic.
Right.
We want to believe that our outward behavior is this perfect, unvarnished reflection of our inner soul. But the reality of human social dynamics is, it's far more complex and often far more restrictive than we like to admit.
Exactly. I mean, I remember when I first started out in broadcasting years ago, I had this idea in my head of what a quote-unquote serious interviewer was supposed to look and sound like.
Oh, I can only imagine.
It was bad. I went out, I bought these awful tweed jackets, I artificially lowered the register of my voice, and I basically stripped away any sense of humor I naturally had.
So you completely buried your actual personality?
Completely. And I was miserable. It was exhausting because it wasn't me. But I felt, deep down, that it was the required costume for the role I was supposed to play.
You accepted the pre-written script?
I totally did. And that tension, between who we are, who society wants us to be, and who we actually have the power to become, that is the entire mission of our deep dive today.
It's such a great topic.
It really is. We are exploring a concept that I find absolutely fascinating. It's the idea of recreating yourself.
Yeah.
We're pulling this from the broader philosophy surrounding the dynamics of power and social leverage. Specifically, the concept that you must be the master of your own image.
Right, which ties into Law 25 from the 48 Laws of Power framework.
Exactly. And we've got an incredible historical roadmap to guide us today. We're looking at titans like Julius Caesar, rebels like the 19th century novelist George Sand, all the way to the memoirs of Casanova and the philosophy of Denis Diderot.
It's a really rich tapestry of history, art, and psychology.
Yeah.
And what connects all these disparate figures across centuries, what unites a Roman dictator with a Parisian novelist, is that they flat out refuse to be passive participants in their own lives.
They wouldn't just take the script.
Exactly. They realize something crucial. Identity is not a fixed, immutable object. It's malleable. It's material. It's like clay that can be sculpted.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core philosophy we're looking at is essentially a declaration of independence from societal expectations. It explicitly says, do not accept the roles that society foists on you. Instead, you need to forge a new identity.
Right.
But not just any identity. One that commands attention, incorporates dramatic devices, and makes your character seem larger than life. You have to be the master of your own image rather than letting your boss, your family, or your culture define it for you.
And to really set the stage for how radical and perhaps how ruthless this concept can be, look at Giovanni Casanova.
Oh man, Casanova.
Right. Now, when I say Casanova, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
The ultimate romantic rogue. Like the seducer, the guy who just floated through 18th century Europe having a great time.
Right. He's remembered almost purely as a romantic caricature.
Yeah.
But if you actually read his memoirs, his writings reveal a deeply pragmatic, almost surgical understanding of social power. He writes extensively about what it takes to make a fortune in a complex, treacherous city like Rome. And his primary piece of advice, you must be a chameleon.
A chameleon.
Yes. You must be perfectly flexible, insinuating, and inscrutable.
And he goes even further than that, which is what really stopped me in my tracks when I was going through his writings. He says you have to be as cold as ice when any other man would be all fire.
Yes, that quote is chilling but brilliant.
And he talks openly about the absolute necessity of playing the hypocrite. I mean, he literally argues that if you don't actually hold the religious beliefs of the powerful people around you, it doesn't matter.
Right, you just fake it.
Yeah. He says you must have religion on your face, on your lips, in your manners. You have to keep your true beliefs completely hidden beneath this meticulously crafted public face.
It sounds intensely cynical to our modern ears, doesn't it?
Oh, completely.
Because we live in an era that completely worships the idea of, living your truth and being your authentic self.
Which is everywhere now.
Right. But Casanova isn't being evil here. He's pointing to a baseline survival mechanism. He understood that the world is inherently judgmental, heavily biased, and rigidly structured.
Yeah, especially back then.
Exactly. If you present your raw, unedited, vulnerable self to a hostile or even just an indifferent world, you will be crushed.
Or at the very least, you'll be marginalized.
Precisely. His advice is to cultivate a surface that perfectly reflects what the environment demands while keeping your inner core completely protected and utterly your own.
Right.
He actually concludes by saying that of all the qualities necessary for his survival and success, he possessed primarily one: immense flexibility.
And see, that's where I think this stops being 18th century history and starts being incredibly relevant to you, the listener.
How so?
Because while Casanova's advice sounds like it belongs in a Machiavellian court, the underlying mechanics of what he's describing is simply image control.
Oh, absolutely.
And image control is something we all use every single day. I mean, when you curate your social media feed to show only your best moments.
Which everyone does.
Right. Or when you consciously choose a formal, deferential tone for an email to a difficult client versus, a relaxed text to your best friend. You are manipulating your image. You are being a chameleon. You are being flexible.
Precisely. The question isn't whether or not you're wearing a mask. The question is whether you consciously designed the mask or if you just grabbed whatever was lying around.
Exactly. And to truly understand how to wield this power of conscious design on a massive scale, we have to look at the historical figure who basically invented the concept of political theater.
Oh, here we go.
I'm talking about a guy who didn't just play a role, but treated the entire world as his personal stage. Julius Caesar.
Caesar is the ultimate masterclass in this principle. I mean, if we dial the clock back to 65 BC, Caesar was not yet the dictator of Rome.
Right, he was just starting out.
Exactly. He wasn't the conqueror of Gaul. He was at the beginning of his political ascent, holding a relatively mid-tier bureaucratic position called an aedile.
An aedile?
Yeah. In the Roman political ladder, the cursus honorum, the aedile, was essentially the official in charge of public maintenance, grain distribution, and public games.
It sounds like a city manager job.
That's exactly how most politicians treated it. It was just an administrative stepping stone. You do the job, you make sure the grain isn't rotting, you put on a decent chariot race, and you move on.
Just check the boxes.
Right. Caesar, however, treated it as a massive theatrical production. He realized that this office gave him direct access to the attention of the Roman masses.
And the scale of what he pulled off is just staggering.
Oh, it was unprecedented.
He started organizing these incredibly carefully crafted, perfectly timed spectacles. We're talking about massive wild beast hunts in the arenas, extravagant gladiator shows featuring fighters in, polished silver armor.
Silver armor, just insane.
And huge theatrical contests. And here's the absolute kicker. He paid for a massive portion of these spectacles out of his own pocket. He took on crushing personal debt to effectively bankroll the entertainment of the entire Roman populace.
He was buying their loyalty, yes, but more importantly, he was forging a deep psychological association.
Like a brand.
Exactly like a modern brand. He wasn't just entertaining them. He was actively wiring their brains to associate the concept of joy, spectacle, and greatness directly with the name Julius Caesar.
Wow.
He bypassed the traditional, stuffy, aristocratic routes to influence by creating a public image of himself as the ultimate showman.
I kept trying to think of a modern equivalent while I was reading this.
Yeah.
And the closest thing I can come up with is a modern billionaire buying a massive social media platform or maybe a beloved sports franchise.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Because they don't usually do it because it's a safe, high-yield financial investment.
Definitely not.
They do it to control the public narrative. They do it to place themselves at the absolute center of the cultural conversation and to associate their personal brand with the public's daily habits.
Right.
Caesar was essentially buying the Roman attention economy. He was just doing it with lions and gladiators instead of algorithms and timelines.
That is a phenomenal parallel. It's about recognizing where the public attention is focused, buying the platform on which that public drama unfolds, and then ensuring you are permanently cast as the star of the show.
Exactly.
But Caesar's understanding of theater didn't stop with public games. It extended into the most critical life-or-death moments of his career.
Oh, like the Rubicon.
Yes. The most famous example, of course, is the crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC.
Let's set the scene for this, because the tension here is unbelievable. Rome is teetering on the absolute edge of a catastrophic civil war. It's Caesar, who has the loyalty of the army, versus Pompey, who has the backing of the Senate in Rome. The tension is at its absolute peak.
Right.
Caesar's been campaigning in Gaul, and the strict Roman law states that a general absolutely cannot bring his standing army across the Rubicon River into Italy proper.
Because doing so is an automatic declaration of war against the state.
Right? It's treason.
It's the point of no return.
Literally. And the historical accounts paint this incredibly cinematic picture of the night before the crossing. Caesar actually attends a public theatrical performance earlier in the evening.
It's just so telling.
Right. It's almost as if he's soaking in the energy of the stage, studying the actors, preparing for his own performance. Then, in the dead of night, he wanders back to his military camp on the banks of the river.
And this is where we see his absolute mastery of human psychology. He is standing before his staff, his top generals.
Right.
These are hardened, brutal military men who have fought in Gaul for years, but right now they are terrified.
Because they know it's treason.
Exactly. Crossing the Rubicon is a monumental treasonous risk. If they fail, they will all be executed. Now think about how a normal leader would handle this.
Like a normal general.
Right. If Caesar had approached them with a prosaic, logical argument, if he had brought out a wax tablet and essentially given a PowerPoint presentation on troop numbers, supply lines, and tactical advantages, he would have lost them.
Wait, why? Wouldn't military men want tactical reassurance?
Yeah. Because rationality invites counter-argument. When you present logic to fearful people, their fear uses that logic to find holes in your plan.
Oh, well.
Rationality breeds hesitation. If you give them data, they will argue with data.
So instead of a spreadsheet, he gives them Shakespeare.
Precisely.
The accounts describe him literally pacing back and forth on the riverbank, arguing both sides of the issue out loud, tossing his hands in the air, acting out his internal turmoil.
He is behaving like a precursor to Hamlet.
Exactly. He is intentionally externalizing his internal conflict to create a mesmerizing scene for his audience of generals.
He's building dramatic tension. He's making them feel the weight of the moment, not just think about it.
Right. And then comes the climax. As he's pacing, he suddenly stops. He points to this incredibly tall, imposing soldier standing near the edge of the river who suddenly blasts a massive call on a trumpet and starts marching across the bridge.
Such a dramatic visual.
Caesar points to this and shouts to his men, "Let us accept this as a sign from the gods and follow where they beckon. The die is cast."
What's fascinating here is, from a psychological perspective, the sheer, cold calculation of that supposedly spontaneous moment.
It wasn't spontaneous at all, was it?
Not at all. He delivered that line, "The die is cast," portentously, locking eyes with his generals. He overwhelmed their rational, calculated fears with a massive tidal wave of drama and a manufactured sense of divine destiny.
Wow.
The generals didn't sit down and analyze the troop movements. They got completely swept up in the emotion of the scene he had just directed.
So they cross.
They rallied to his cause, crossed the river, and by the following year, he had vanquished Pompey. He used theater to completely bypass their logic.
Okay, I love the strategy of it, but I have to push back a little bit here on behalf of the skeptical listener.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't this just massive unchecked vanity? I mean, we're talking about a guy who clearly loved the sound of his own voice.
Well, yes.
And when I was looking into his life, I found this detail, that he was notoriously vain about his appearance, specifically his receding hairline.
Ah, yes. The baldness.
He apparently loved being granted unprecedented honors by the Senate, primarily because it gave him a legal excuse to wear a laurel wreath everywhere he went, specifically to hide his baldness.
That is true.
I mean, that doesn't sound like a transcendent master strategist. That sounds like a guy deeply insecure about getting older.
It's incredibly easy to dismiss it as mere vanity, and many of his political enemies did exactly that. But that's a misreading of the dynamic.
Really? How so?
Yes, he had personal vanities, he was human. But his theatrics were a form of sublimated psychology. You have to understand what the theater meant in ancient Rome.
Okay.
It was not a polite, quiet, upper-class affair where people golf-clapped. It was a massive, visceral, bloody, loud event attended by unimaginable crowds. It had a powerful, almost religious appeal to the common citizen.
So he tapped into that.
Caesar had an obsessive personal interest in drama, yes, but he brilliantly channeled that private obsession into his public political life. He didn't just participate in the world. He made himself the lead actor, the director, and the producer on the world stage.
So the laurel wreath wasn't just a toupee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, it hid his baldness, which satisfied his vanity. But strategically, it functioned as a constant visual symbol of victory, of military triumph, and of a semi-divine status.
Ah, I see.
Every time the public saw him, they didn't see a balding, middle-aged politician. They saw the physical embodiment of Roman glory. It was a perfectly deployed prop.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
He was playing the leading man in every single aspect of his life, even in the chaos of warfare. I read that during battles, he would purposely ride the strongest, most distinctively colored horse, and he would position himself in the dead center of the fighting.
Right, where everyone would see him.
Yeah, he wanted the soldiers to see him in the thick of it, acting as this untouchable, godlike symbol of power. He wasn't a modern general leading from a tent 3 miles back. He was center stage, making sure the spotlight was on him.
And when peace finally came and he was the undisputed ruler, the spectacles didn't stop. They just grew exponentially larger. He orchestrated chariot races, fights to the death among the actual Roman nobility to shock the plebeians, and enormous mock naval battles where he literally flooded an artificial lake.
That is wild.
He understood spatial dominance, too. He built a giant new public theater, but he designed it so that it sloped dramatically down the Tarpeian Rock.
Wait, pause on that. For listeners who don't know Roman geography, what is the Tarpeian Rock and why did that matter?
The Tarpeian Rock was a steep cliff in Rome that had a very specific dark history. It was the traditional execution site where murderers and traitors to the Republic were thrown to their deaths.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was a symbol of the state's ultimate lethal power.
That is heavy.
So by building his theater sloping down that specific rock, Caesar was symbolically layering his entertainment over the site of ultimate punishment.
Oh, I get it now.
It was a massive psychological flex. He was essentially saying, I have conquered even the darkest, most terrifying aspects of the state, and I have turned them into a stage for your amusement.
That is brilliant.
It's brilliant. Later, in 45 BC, he brought Cleopatra back to Rome. He didn't just have her quietly move in. He timed her entry perfectly for maximum public shock and awe.
More theater.
Exactly. He constantly wore spectacular, solid purple robes, the color of royalty, so he could literally never be upstaged in a crowd. Every public appearance was meticulously staged to incorporate a surprise, a startling announcement that kept the public completely obsessively hooked on the unfolding narrative of Julius Caesar.
He was treating the public like an audience binge-watching a TV show.
Essentially, yes.
He always had to give them a cliffhanger. He even kept the theatrics going during his own assassination.
Oh, the assassination is the peak of his theatricality.
Right. On the Ides of March, as he's literally being stabbed to death by Brutus, Cassius, and the conspirators, the historical accounts note that he actually takes the presence of mind to draw his gown over his face and drop the lower part of his toga over his legs.
He did him while dying.
Yes. He wanted to ensure that as he bled out on the floor of the Senate, he fell and died, looking visually, quote, decent and dignified.
It is the absolute ultimate commitment to the bit. He was directing his own death scene.
And his final words.
You.
To my child, spoken in Greek to Brutus. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was delivered as if it had been perfectly rehearsed for the tragic finale of a play. He wanted his death to be poetic.
And it worked. I mean, we are still quoting it over 2,000 years later.
Seriously.
But let's bring this back to reality. If we extrapolate this to the listener's world today, the lesson obviously isn't about staging gladiator fights or dramatic death scenes in the office.
Please don't do that.
Right. It's about understanding the power of broad gestures. Caesar's gestures were designed specifically for the cheap seats, the common man who couldn't hear his speeches but could see his purple robes and his dramatic pointing.
If Caesar were alive today, he would absolutely master the algorithm.
Without a doubt. He would understand exactly what imagery, what pacing, and what emotional resonance cuts through the constant noise of modern mass media.
It'd be viral every day.
He recognized a fundamental truth that hasn't changed in 2 millennia. Humans are fundamentally emotional creatures who respond to narrative and spectacle far more powerfully than they respond to facts and logic.
Okay, so Caesar used theater to conquer the world. He treated his identity as a weapon of mass influence. But conquering the world is exhausting, and it's not everyone's goal. Sometimes the goal of recreating yourself isn't about dominion at all.
Not at all.
Sometimes it's just about basic survival. It's about achieving freedom in a world that wants to lock you in a cage. And this leads us directly to a completely different but equally powerful application of this strategy in 19th century Paris. We're talking about the George Sand strategy.
This is a remarkable shift in context. With Caesar, we saw the projection of power outward to dominate others.
Right.
With Aurore Dupin de Durand, the woman who would eventually become known to the world as George Sand, we see the creation of a persona as an impenetrable defensive shield.
Let's paint the picture of her life before the transformation. The year is 1831. Aurore is living in the French provinces. She's trapped in a deeply unfulfilling marriage.
A very common story for the time.
Yeah, and she makes a decision that was almost unthinkable for a woman of her station at that time. She leaves her husband, leaves her comfortable provincial life, and travels to Paris with a singular burning goal. She wants to be a professional writer.
Which was incredibly radical.
Very. She viewed her assigned role of provincial wife as a literal prison that robbed her of her intellect, her time, and her freedom.
But the reality of 1831 Paris hits her like a brick wall. The social structure for women at that time, heavily influenced by the Napoleonic Code, was incredibly rigid and, frankly, brutal.
How so?
The law essentially treated women as minors. To have any true freedom, to rent an apartment, to travel, to exist independently, you needed money.
Right.
And for a woman in that era, money basically came from only two sources. You were either supported by a husband or you turned to prostitution.
And the idea of a woman making an independent, wealthy living purely through writing was laughable to the establishment.
Completely laughable.
Writing was considered a cute, delicate hobby for aristocratic women, something to do in the parlor while supported by a husband's wealth. It wasn't a profession.
No.
In fact, she takes her early writing to an established editor in Paris, hoping for a breakthrough. And this editor looks at her and bluntly tells her, "You should make babies, madame, not literature."
It is a staggering, suffocating level of dismissal.
I can't even imagine.
She was facing a society that had already written her script from the moment she was born. Her primary assigned role was wife and mother.
Right.
The only alternative role society was willing to offer her was second-rate female hobbyist. If she accepted either of those roles, her power, her income, and her potential would be permanently capped at the very low ceiling society had established for those specific characters.
So she realizes that the game is completely rigged against Aurore Dupin. So she decides to stop playing Aurore Dupin. She does something incredibly risky. In 1832, she manages to get her first major novel, titled Indiana, accepted by a publisher. But she doesn't publish it under her real name.
No, she doesn't.
She publishes it under a brand new pseudonym, George Sand. And the book is a smash hit. Suddenly, all of the Parisian literary elite are talking about this impressive, brilliant, fierce, new male writer.
But here is where she separates herself from other female authors who just used male pen names, like the Bronte sisters later on.
Oh, this is the best part.
She didn't just change her name on the title page. She brought the character to life in the physical world. She embodied the persona.
Yeah.
She had always found women's corsets and massive dresses restrictive, but now she weaponized men's clothing.
The physical transformation is amazing. Describe what she looked like walking down the street in Paris.
She started wearing these heavy, long, tailored men's coats. She wore thick, loud, heavy men's boots that clacked on the cobblestones, completely unlike the silent, dainty slippers women were expected to wear.
Yeah. The auditory disruption.
Exactly. She wore gray top hats and dandyish cravats. But it wasn't just the clothes. She completely altered her physical presence.
How so?
She smoked large, pungent cigars in public cafes, which was a massive social taboo. In conversation, she adopted the mannerisms of an assertive man. She dominated discussions, she interrupted, and she used saucy, aggressive, even vulgar language that was completely forbidden for women of her social standing.
And the result of this theatrical performance is incredible. The public is entirely fascinated by this strange, enigmatic, boundary-breaking figure.
They couldn't look away.
And crucially, unlike literally every other female writer of her time, George Sand is fully accepted into the elite inner circle clique of male artists in Paris. She isn't relegated to the parlor. She is drinking, smoking, and debating with the heavyweights.
She completely flipped the power dynamic of gender relations. She conducted high-profile affairs with some of the most famous men in Europe, the poet Alfred de Musset, the composers Franz Liszt and Frédéric Chopin. And in these relationships, she was the one who did the pursuing, she was the one who dictated the terms, and she was the one who decided when the affair was over.
Wow.
She acted with the total liberty of a wealthy man. And when the pure literary rebel persona risked getting a little stale a decade later, she didn't just coast into irrelevance. She pivoted the character dramatically into politics, writing political tracts, leading demonstrations, and inspiring student rebellion.
It's brilliant. Caesar wanted to sit on the throne of society, but George Sand just wanted to exist completely outside of society's trap.
Yes.
She wanted to dictate the terms of her own existence. But reading through her history brings up a really pivotal question for me.
What's that?
In reading all of this, the lengths she went to, the clothes, the cigars, the aggressive masculine mannerisms, did she actually want to be a man? Or was this purely a strategic theatrical costume?
That's a very common question.
Because looking at it through a modern lens, people might interpret her actions as an expression of gender dysphoria.
It's a very important question, and historians have debated it. But if we look at the primary sources, specifically her private correspondence, we get a very clear answer.
Which is?
In her private journals and in deeply personal letters to very close friends like the novelist Gustave Flaubert, she was explicit. She had absolutely no desire to actually be a man.
Oh, really?
Yes. She wrote about her love for being a mother, her appreciation for certain feminine aspects of her life. She was fully hyper-aware that George Sand, the cigar-smoking brute, was a part she was playing for public consumption.
Wow. So it wasn't about a crisis of internal identity. It was about theatrical utility. It was a tool.
Exactly. What she truly wanted was freedom. She wanted the power to determine her own character, to refuse the limits society tried to force upon her physical body. And this introduces one of the most fascinating psychological concepts we'll discuss today, the persona as armor.
I love this concept. Break this down for us.
When you create a new identity, a public face that is distinct, deliberate, and separate from your private self, it physically and emotionally protects you.
How does it protect you?
It protects you because it isn't the real you, it is a costume. When the conservative critics of Paris attacked George Sand, when they mocked the heavy boots or wrote scathing reviews of the cigar smoking, they were attacking a character.
Not her.
Right. They were attacking a fictional construct. They were not attacking Aurore Dupin. Because the persona is constructed, you can take the costume off at the end of the day.
Right. You leave it at the door.
And that means you don't have to internalize the world's attacks. Your core remains pristine and untouched.
I want to take this concept of the persona as armor and apply it directly to you, the listener. Think about your own life. Think about your workplace or your extended family. What role have they assigned to you? Are you the quiet, diligent worker who never asks for a raise? Are you the family fixer who absorbs everyone else's emotional trauma?
Or the jester who isn't taken seriously.
Exactly. The philosophy we're discussing gives a stark warning. If you passively accept a pre-assigned role, your power, your income, and your peace of mind are strictly limited to the tiny amount allotted to that role.
Yes, you are capped.
George Sand's strategy proves that refusing the boundary, tearing up the script, is the only way to seize control of your own narrative. You don't have to start smoking cigars or wearing top hats, but you absolutely have to recognize the costume you are currently wearing. And you have to realize you have the power to change it.
And this act of defiance, this refusal to be categorized, is fundamentally an autistic endeavor. You are taking responsibility for your own creation. You are working on yourself like clay.
Yeah.
Which actually leads us to a broader, really interesting historical question. Where did this idea of self-creation, this ability to treat your own identity as a work of art, actually originate?
Because it wasn't always this way, right? I mean, both Caesar and Sand engaged in this ultimate act of self-creation, but there were massive exceptions to the rule. Historically, for thousands of years, the average person didn't have the luxury of an identity crisis. The peasant working in the wheat field wasn't sitting around worrying about their personal brand or living authentically.
No, absolutely not. For most of human history, only kings, queens, and the absolute highest tier of wealthy lords had the freedom, the time, and the resources to shape their public image.
Right. They had staffs of people for that.
They had court painters, heralds, and poets to craft their narrative. The masses simply played their assigned roles, blacksmith, farmer, servant, with very little self-consciousness.
So when did that change? When did the power to create an image start trickling down?
The shift in this dynamic, the beginning of the democratization of self-creation, can actually be traced through the history of art.
Oh, really?
Yes, historians point to a very specific, massive shift detected in the year 1656, encapsulated in a single revolutionary painting by the Spanish master Diego Velázquez. The painting is called Las Meninas.
I looked this painting up while prepping for this, and it is a trip. For those listening who haven't seen it, let me paint the picture for you visually.
Please do.
Las Meninas is a very large, complex painting set in a room in the Spanish Royal Alcázar of Madrid. But the key to understanding why it's revolutionary is where the artist places himself.
This is the genius part.
Velázquez paints himself very prominently on the left side of the canvas. He is standing tall, holding a palette and brush, looking directly out at us. He is standing before a massive canvas that has its back to us, so we cannot see what he's actually painting. In the center of the room are a young Spanish princess, her female attendants, the Meninas, and a court dwarf.
And here is the crucial, history-altering detail. The actual king and queen of Spain, King Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, the most powerful people in the global empire, the people who are literally paying Velázquez's salary. Where are they in the painting?
They aren't the central figures. They are relegated to these tiny, blurry reflections in a small mirror hanging on the dark back wall of the room.
Exactly.
The perspective implies that the king and queen are standing where we, the viewers, are standing outside the frame, posing for the painting Velázquez is working on.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, I was super puzzled by this when I first realized what he did.
Okay.
The king and queen are footing the bill. They control the armies. They control the wealth of a global empire. Velázquez is just an employee. How does Velázquez making them tiny, blurry reflections in a background mirror give him any power? Isn't he just risking having his head chopped off for insulting the king?
It's a huge risk, but it is a subtle, earth-shattering power move. Velázquez is using the physical medium of the painting as an allegory for image control. So you have to understand the social dynamic. For centuries, the artist was viewed merely as a skilled tradesman. They were basically considered high-end furniture makers.
Just laborers, really.
Exactly. They were slavish dependents whose only job was to accurately flatter the monarch. By composing the painting this way, Velázquez is breaking the fourth wall of power. He is declaring, visually, I am the one who controls the image.
He's saying, you might have the armies, but I control how history sees you.
Exactly. He decides who is prominent in the light and who is minimized in the background mirror. He is determining his own position in the hierarchy of the painting and, by extension, elevating his position in Spanish society.
Wow.
He ceases to be a mere servant and remakes himself into a man of intellectual and cultural power.
He essentially walked onto the set and took the director's chair away from the king.
Precisely. And cultural historians trace a fascinating trickle-down effect from this specific moment.
The trickle-down of self-creation.
Yes, this radical realization that you can determine your own position in the picture started with kings. Then, artists like Velázquez claimed it for themselves. From artists, it passed to writers and intellectuals like George Sand, then to the dandies and bohemians of the 19th century like Oscar Wilde.
And then to us.
Exactly. Finally, over centuries of cultural evolution, it filtered down to the rest of society, to the average citizen, to us today.
So let's extrapolate this for you, listening right now, maybe commuting to a job you feel stuck in. What does it mean to determine your position in the painting in your own modern life?
It's a great question.
It means taking a hard look at who is currently holding the paintbrush. Is it your boss dictating your career trajectory? Is it your peers defining what success looks like? Is it your parents' expectations of who you should marry or where you should live? Taking control means grabbing that pen out of their hands and refusing to be a blurry background character or a tiny reflection in someone else's story.
It is about spatial awareness in your social dynamics. Ask yourself, in the meetings you attend and the relationships you build, are you placing yourself at the center of your own narrative? Or are you constantly deferring to the framing provided by others, standing off to the side while they take the center light?
I agree completely with the philosophy. It is incredibly empowering. It makes you want to, kick down a door.
Yeah, it's very motivating.
But I have to demand some practical application here.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the listener is fired up and wants to start painting their own masterpiece, to start acting their new role tomorrow morning, where do they actually start? What are the actual day-to-day mechanics of becoming a master actor in your own life?
The first, and arguably the most difficult step, is achieving a state of hyper self-consciousness combined with absolute emotional control.
Emotional control.
Yes. To explain this, we lean heavily on the philosophy of the 18th century French philosopher Denis Diderot. Diderot wrote a famous essay called The Paradox of the Actor.
What's the paradox?
He analyzed what made a theatrical performance truly compelling, and he proposed a theory that feels very counterintuitive, especially today. He argued that a truly great actor on stage simulates emotion perfectly. They look angry, they look devastated, they weep, but internally, in their own mind, they feel absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. They are cold, calculating, and fully in control of their instrument.
And he said the opposite is true too, right?
Yeah. Yes. Conversely, Diderot said the bad actor is the one who is always sincere.
Wait, the bad actor is sincere.
Yes. The bad actor actually tries to feel the sadness or the anger on stage. Because real emotion is messy, unpredictable, and ultimately self-indulgent, it ruins the performance. The audience stops seeing the character and starts seeing the actor having a breakdown.
This is where this philosophy gets incredibly ruthless.
Yeah.
It warns that in the real world, outside of a theater, method acting, actually experiencing the raw emotions you're displaying, is fatal to your power.
Absolutely fatal.
It argues that people who wear their hearts on their sleeves, who just let every raw, unfiltered emotion show on their face out in society, are tiresome and embarrassing. It specifically targets crying in public. It argues that while crying at the office might get you some temporary sympathy in the moment, that sympathy very quickly sours into scorn and irritation.
Because the audience feels manipulated.
Or they just get deeply uncomfortable because you force them to deal with your lack of control.
Diderot is arguing that unmanaged sincerity is a burden you place on others.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back strongly on behalf of the listener here because this is where the 18th century clashes violently with the 21st century.
Let's hear the clash.
If you open up LinkedIn right now, or if you listen to any modern leadership seminar or read Brené Brown, the two biggest buzzwords in corporate culture are authenticity and vulnerability.
Yes, they are everywhere.
We are constantly aggressively told to bring our whole authentic selves to work, to share our mental health struggles with our team, to be transparent about our fears.
True.
But this philosophy we are discussing is explicitly saying that being totally sincere is a terrible idea and that showing raw emotion makes people secretly despise you. How do we possibly reconcile Diderot's coldness with modern corporate culture? Are we supposed to be sociopaths?
It's the most common point of friction with this concept, but if we connect this to the bigger picture of power dynamics, the philosophy is not advocating for you to become a literal sociopath who feels no emotion.
Okay, that's a relief.
Right. It is making a crucial, highly nuanced distinction between experiencing an emotion and displaying an emotion. True power requires that you externalize emotion in a form that others can easily digest without you being enslaved by the actual feeling in that moment.
So it's about translation. It's about processing the raw ore into a usable tool.
Exactly. Let's look at the modern demand for vulnerability. When a company says they want vulnerability, what they usually want is curated vulnerability.
Curated vulnerability.
Yes. They want a story of a struggle that you have already overcome, which proves your resilience. If a CEO stands up in a crisis, genuinely weeping, totally panicked, and sincerely saying, I have no idea what we are going to do, we are all going to lose our jobs, that is 100% authentic.
Very authentic.
It is completely sincere, and it will cause an immediate stock crash and a mass exodus of talent.
Because sincerity in that moment is terrifying.
Right. A good leader must be able to project a compassionate look or righteous anger or even a strategic single terror at will to serve the moment and guide the audience's reaction. They maintain plasticity.
So you have to steer the ship.
Uncontrolled, raw emotional dumping is unpredictable. It makes audiences, colleagues, and followers deeply uncomfortable because it shows a profound lack of control. Diderot's point is that the moment you are overwhelmed by real emotion, you lose the ability to direct the scene. You are no longer acting upon the world. The world is acting upon you.
Okay, that makes sense. So step one is gaining emotional control, building a psychological dam so you can release the water exactly when and how you choose rather than letting it flood the valley.
Perfect analogy.
Step two in the mechanics of self-creation is creating the actual character. You need a memorable persona that compels attention, stands out from the background noise, and communicates your values instantly.
Right.
And there is a brilliant, very American example of this, Abraham Lincoln.
Lincoln is a masterclass in the George Sand strategy, but adapted for the massive scale of national politics. Today, we view Lincoln's image, the hat, the beard, the solemn face, as just historical fact.
Right, it's just carved into Mount Rushmore.
But in his time, it was a highly curated, deliberately constructed character.
People forget that before he was president, he was a highly successful, wealthy corporate railroad lawyer.
Yeah.
He wasn't just a guy chopping wood in the forest.
Exactly. But he deliberately played up the homespun palm and countryman, the rail splitter image.
Why did he do that?
He knew that America, entering a period of deep existential crisis and division leading up to the Civil War, would deeply resonate with a president who felt rooted, rugged, and unpretentious. It was a stark, calculated contrast to the polished, aristocratic, powdered politicians of the East Coast establishment.
The details are what make it genius. He leaned into the slightly ill-fitting clothes. He wore the exceptionally tall stovepipe hat to make his already towering, gawky frame seem even more monumental and impossible to ignore in a crowd. And most notably, the beard. We think of Lincoln and the beard as biologically inseparable. But when he was first running for president, he was clean-shaven.
He was.
It was only after he won the election that he grew it. And no president before him had ever worn a beard.
It was a massive visual disruption. It was a deliberate, highly visible prop.
Right. And he utilized the brand new technology of the era mass photography, specifically the portraits by Matthew Brady, to mass distribute this specific visual icon across the country.
Photography changed everything.
People who would never hear him speak could see the character he had built. He was building a national brand before the concept of branding even existed.
That beard wasn't just facial hair. It was an anchor for the character. In the visual language of the 19th century, it communicated patriarchal wisdom, a certain gravity, melancholy, and frontier toughness, without him having to utter a single syllable.
It did so much heavy lifting.
It is a perfect example of creating a character that commands attention and controls the narrative.
But looking the part is only half the battle. You can have a great costume, like Lincoln's beard or George Sand's heavy boots, but a static painting is ultimately boring.
Very true.
If you just stand there looking cool, people will eventually look away to check their phones. To keep an audience hooked, you need movement. You need action. And that brings us to the crucial element of rhythm and the mechanics of drama.
Exactly. Drama is not an image. It is an unfolding event across time. And the heartbeat of good drama is rhythm, timing, and most crucially, suspense.
Suspense?
To illustrate this, let's look at a master of theatrical timing, Harry Houdini.
The escape artist.
Yes. Houdini was incredibly physically skilled. He could pick the locks on police handcuffs or escape from a straitjacket, often in a matter of seconds.
Oh, really? Just seconds?
Yes. But he realized a profound truth about human psychology. If he escaped in 10 seconds, the audience would actually be unimpressed. It would look too easy. They would think it was a trick lock.
So what did he do?
He would artificially drag out the escapes. He would make an escape that required 10-second stretch into agonizing minutes.
Wow.
He would thrash around behind the curtain. He would contort his face. He would let the tension build in the room, make the audience sweat, make them genuinely fear for his life as the clock ticked down.
Just playing with their emotions.
And then, at the absolute peak of the tension, he would emerge triumphant, gasping for air. He completely controlled the tempo of their emotion.
He understood that the psychological value wasn't in the escape itself. The value, the entertainment, the power, was in the suspense of the escape.
Exactly.
And this translates directly from the vaudeville stage to the highest levels of global politics. Let's look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the 1932 election.
A brilliant example.
The context is vital here to understand the theatrical move he makes. The United States in 1932 is in the absolute terrifying depths of the Great Depression. It's an unprecedented economic crisis. Banks are failing daily, wiping out life savings. There are bread lines. People are desperate for salvation.
Roosevelt wins the election in a landslide. Now, the natural expectation, the standard political script, is that the president-elect will immediately start reassuring the panicked public.
Right.
You hold daily press conferences, you outline your grand rescue plan, you project confidence. Instead, FDR does the exact opposite.
Hey, what does he do?
He goes into a retreat. He imposes a near-total media silence. He refuses to announce any of his cabinet picks. He even breaks protocol and refuses to meet with the sitting president, Herbert Hoover, to discuss the transition of power or coordinate a response to the banking crisis.
I want to point out the absolute brilliance of this from a pacing perspective. But going completely dark, He created an immense vacuum. And nature, especially political nature, abhors a vacuum.
Yes, it does.
The anxiety and suspense in the country built to a fever pitch. Everyone was on the edge of their seats wondering, what is this new man going to do? Does he have a plan? Are we doomed? He artificially lowered expectations and built tension, exactly like Houdini thrashing around underwater, refusing to come up for air.
The silence amplifies the incoming noise, and then Inauguration Day hits.
And the pacing completely flips on a dime. He delivers a powerful, sweeping inaugural address. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, signaling a total radical break from the past.
Yes.
And immediately after, he initiates the legendary 100 Days. It was an impossibly rapid rollout of bold, sweeping legislation. He declares a national bank holiday. He creates new government agencies out of thin air. He completely rewrites the social contract. The sheer velocity of the action was staggering.
Exactly. By artificially delaying his start, by holding his breath, the subsequent explosion of action felt twice as impactful.
It's just genius pacing.
If he had been leaking his plans to the press for months beforehand, the legislation would have felt expected, maybe even tedious. The public would have nitpicked the details. But because it came out of total, terrifying silence, it felt like a miraculous, overwhelming rescue. He orchestrated the real-world events to unfold in a way that maximized their dramatic psychological effect.
Drama, timing, and misdirection can be used to inspire a nation, as FDR did, but they can also be used defensively to confuse and deceive your enemies.
Right.
There's a fascinating example of this from the post-World War II era involving the House Committee on Un-American Activities, or HUAC. And just a quick note for the listener, we are looking at this strictly through the lens of theatrical mechanics. We are reporting impartially on the strategies used during this highly charged historical moment, focusing purely on the interpersonal chess moves.
Right. Our focus is purely on the strategy of the performance. So, the German playwright Bertolt Brecht, who was a brilliant theatrical mind, had fled the Nazis and was working as a screenwriter in Hollywood.
Okay.
In 1947, he gets subpoenaed by HUAC due to his supposed communist sympathies. Now, this was a terrifying committee. It had the power to destroy your career, bankrupt you, or send you to prison.
So the stakes are incredibly high?
Yeah. Very high. Other writers and artists who were called to testify usually took one of two paths. They either broke down, capitulated, and named names of their colleagues, or they took an angry, highly emotional, highly principled stand, screaming at the committee members about the First Amendment.
And Brecht recognized something fundamental about power dynamics. The committee was fully prepared for anger. Anger was the assigned role for the outraged artist.
Precisely.
When you scream at an inquisitor, you are playing exactly the part they want you to play. It allows them to play their corresponding part as the stern, righteous defender of the nation. It gives them the moral high ground in the theater of the courtroom. Brecht refused the script. He decided he was going to charm them and confuse them simultaneously.
He treated his own testimony like a scene he was directing. He rehearsed his responses meticulously with his lawyers, and he brought a prop.
A prop to a congressional hearing?
Yes. He brought a cigar to the hearing, specifically because he had researched and knew that the head of the committee, J. Parnell Thomas, was an avid cigar smoker. It was a subtle, almost subconscious visual cue of camaraderie.
So clever. Instead of delivering a heartfelt, sincere tirade, Brecht played the role of the bemused, polite, slightly confusing European intellectual.
The absent-minded professor.
Yeah. The committee would ask him a direct question about his political affiliations, and he would puff his cigar, look thoughtful, and deliver answers that were perfectly crafted to be ambiguous, funny, and double-edged.
Brilliant.
He used translation issues, pretending his English wasn't great when it was perfect. He went off on dense philosophical tangents about the nature of poetry. He essentially ran rhetorical circles around the committee.
Because he didn't give them the anger they expected. They didn't know how to react. They lost their pacing. They were totally disarmed by the theatrical production he put on.
It completely threw them off.
They actually thanked him for being a cooperative witness, and the very next day, he hopped on a plane back to Europe, completely scot-free. He used the rhythm of confusion to escape the trap.
So what does this all mean for us? We've seen how to build suspense like Houdini, how to control the pacing of action like FDR, and how to use misdirection and refusal of the script like Brecht. This drives us toward the grand finale of self-recreation. We are talking about the subtle, almost magical arts of entrances, exits, and shape-shifting.
The climax of any great dramatic performance is what the French call the beau geste. the beautiful gesture.
The beau geste.
It is a single symbolic action that encapsulates your triumph, your boldness, or your essence. It's a moment of pure poetry. Caesar pointing to the trumpeter at the Rubicon was a beau geste. It is a move that elevates you to heroic proportions in the eyes of the audience.
And a huge part of the beau geste is understanding that how you enter and exit the stage is just as important as what you do while you're standing on it.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at Cleopatra. When she first needs to meet Julius Caesar in Egypt, her country is occupied. She doesn't just send a letter asking for a polite diplomatic appointment.
Yeah, she doesn't.
She has herself smuggled past enemy lines, rolled up inside a lavish carpet. The carpet is brought into Caesar's private quarters, and she is dramatically unfurled at his feet, revealing the young queen of Egypt. It is an unforgettable, visually stunning entrance that instantly hooked Caesar's imagination. You can't ignore a woman who unrolls from a rug.
Conversely, the mastery of the exit is equally powerful. George Washington is the prime historical example here. Washington understood a very deep truth about human nature. Lingering too long diminishes your aura. Familiarity breeds contempt.
He knew when to leave.
He maximized his symbolic impact by voluntarily walking away from ultimate power, not once, but twice.
Explain the context of that first exit, because to modern ears, it just sounds like retiring. But at the time, it was mind-blowing.
After winning the Revolutionary War, Washington had the absolute loyalty of the military. Throughout human history up to that point, a victorious general in that position almost always crowned himself king or dictator.
Right, that was the script.
The world fully expected him to do so. Instead, in 1783, he formally resigned his military commission and went home to his farm in Mount Vernon.
Wow.
He pulled a Cincinnatus, the ancient Roman who saved the Republic, and then voluntarily went back to his plow. It stunned the courts of Europe. King George III of England heard about it and said, if he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world.
And then he did it again. After serving 2 terms as president, when he could have easily served until he died, he voluntarily stepped down, establishing a democratic precedent that lasted for over a century.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
By exiting gracefully and entirely on his own terms, he cemented his legacy as a demigod. He elevated his character far above ordinary grasping politicians who cling desperately to power until they are dragged out.
But there is a crucial warning hidden in all of this, a reversal of sorts. The philosophy states that while you must use dramatic devices, you have to remember that bad theater is still bad theater.
What do you mean?
Overacting is entirely counterproductive. If you are constantly flailing your arms, crying, shouting, and demanding attention, you don't look powerful, you just look desperate and exhausted.
This is where the concept of stillness becomes a weapon, and I absolutely love the example used here. It cites the legendary Welsh actor Richard Burton.
A phenomenal actor.
Burton discovered early in his stage career that if he stood absolutely totally still on stage while the other actors were moving around, speaking loudly and gesturing, the audience's eyes would naturally, inevitably be drawn to him.
It's a profound paradox, and there is actual neuroscience behind why this works.
Oh, really? Tell me about the neuroscience.
Human brains are wired as pattern recognition machines. We are designed to filter out constant baseline stimuli. If you're watching a play and the baseline pattern is actors moving around and talking, then kinetic motion becomes the invisible baseline.
So we tune it out.
The brain stops registering it as important. Therefore, absolute stillness becomes the anomaly. Stillness becomes the pattern breaker. The brain says, wait, why isn't that guy moving? He must be important.
That is amazing. So sometimes the absolute most dramatic thing you can do is absolutely nothing. It is the starkest contrast imaginable to Caesar's wild beast hunts. Burton proved that true presence doesn't require noise, it requires gravity.
Exactly. It's about how you carry yourself. Your gracefulness and your imposing stillness on the social stage often count for much more than frantically trying to hit every mark and speak every line. And this leads to the ultimate, highest goal of self-creation, which is perfectly symbolized by the ancient Greek sea god Proteus.
Proteus is such a great, weird mythological image to end on. According to Greek myth, Proteus was an ancient god of the sea who possessed the absolute power of prophecy. He knew everything past, present, and future.
But he was lazy.
He was. And he didn't want to share his knowledge. So whenever a hero tried to grab him and force him to speak, Proteus would instantly change shape. He would turn into a roaring lion to scare them. If they held on, he would turn into a slippery serpent, then a snarling panther, a wild boar, rushing water, and finally, a leafy tree.
Completely uncatchable.
He was impossible to capture, impossible to pin down, because he never maintained a single graspable form.
The historical figure who best embodied this Protean strategy in the real world was the 19th century German statesman Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck was a master of the Protean mask. He unified Germany, but he did it by being utterly unpinnable. To a liberal politician, Bismarck spoke and appeared as a liberal. To a conservative war hawk, Bismarck sounded exactly like a hawk.
He was the ultimate chameleon.
He adapted his face, his rhetoric, and his energy to whatever the specific moment required. Because he never rigidly committed to a single ideological caricature, his enemies could never accurately predict his moves. They couldn't build a strategy against him because they didn't know who he was. As the philosophy summarizes beautifully, what cannot be grasped cannot be consumed.
It reminds me of the advice from Balthazar Gracian, the 17th century philosopher, who said, "You must be a discreet Proteus. You should be a scholar among scholars and a saint among saints. You adapt your temperament to the person you are meeting."
And to synthesize this core lesson for the listener, to be Protean isn't about being weak. It isn't about lacking a core personality or being a spineless crowd pleaser. It is the exact opposite.
Right.
It is the ultimate defense mechanism and the absolute highest art of social navigation. Your inner core, your true beliefs, your ultimate goals remains yours, heavily guarded and untouched. But your outward form flows like water, taking the exact shape of whatever container you find yourself in.
And by taking the shape of the container, you subtly direct the flow of the entire room.
Precisely.
So how can you, the listener, apply Washington's exits, Burton's stillness, or Bismarck's shape-shifting to your life tomorrow? It starts by realizing that the mundane moments are actually scenes in your play.
They really are.
How you leave a job. Do you burn bridges? Or do you exit gracefully like Washington? How you exit a room after a successful pitch? Or choosing not to speak in a frantic, chaotic meeting, utilizing Burton's stillness. These subtle choices can carry massively more theatrical weight than anything you actually say out loud.
You are directing the audience's attention through contrast. If everyone in your office is panicking over a lost account, your absolute cold stillness becomes magnetic. People will look to you for leadership.
They will.
If everyone expects you to fight back defensively to criticism, your polite Brechtian ambiguity becomes an impenetrable shield.
We've covered an incredible, sprawling journey today. We started with the sheer, overwhelming spectacles of Julius Caesar, who bankrolled the Roman games and directed his own death to cast himself as the eternal star of the empire.
What a story.
We looked at the brilliant, desperate survival strategy of George Sand, who forged a male persona as protective armor against a society that wanted to erase her potential. We saw Velázquez pin himself into power, taking control of the canvas from the King of Spain and breaking the fourth wall.
We analyzed the ruthless emotional control advocated by Diderot and how to apply it without being a sociopath. We explored the visual branding of Abraham Lincoln's beard.
The famous beard.
We looked at the rhythmic suspense of Houdini and the devastating silence of FDR's 100 Days. We watched Bertolt Brecht use theatrical misdirection to puff his cigar and escape a hostile committee. And finally, we arrived at the power of the beau geste, the commanding stillness of Richard Burton, and the shape-shifting, ungraspable mastery of Bismarck as the modern Proteus.
The overarching message of all these historical sources, the core takeaway for you to use in your life, is that the character you were born with or the one your family and society molded for you is not a life sentence.
No, it is not.
You have the Promethean right to treat yourself like clay. You can, and you absolutely should, sculpt your own identity.
This raises an important question, though. It's a thought that builds on everything we've discussed, but shifts the context entirely to the bizarre world we currently inhabit.
Where are we going with this?
We've traced the power of self-creation from kings to court artists to bohemian writers to the rest of society today. But we now live in a hyper-digital age where everyone is constantly curating an image. We are all playing avatars online.
That's very true.
We apply filters, we select our best angles, we broadcast carefully edited, highly theatrical versions of our lives on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn.
We are all acting on a massive global stage, 24/7, with an audience of millions potentially watching us.
Precisely. So the final question becomes, In a society where self-creation and image manipulation are no longer a rare subversive strategy, but the absolute baseline norm, has the act of wearing a mask lost its power?
Oh, wow, that's a good point.
If every single person you interact with is highly conscious of their personal brand, perhaps the old strategies of grand theatricality are just becoming white noise. If everyone is playing a perfectly manicured part, perhaps the ultimate, most shocking theatrical surprise left, the true, devastating modern beau geste, is figuring out exactly the right moment to drop the act entirely.
To drop the mask.
To let the audience suddenly, jarringly, see the flawed, real person behind the curtain. In a world of flawless masks, strategic, perfectly timed, absolute vulnerability might be the most powerful dramatic device we have left.
Man, that is an incredibly provocative thought to leave off on. If everyone expects a performance, the realest thing you can do might just be the most brilliant performance of all. I want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up and look in the mirror before you walk out the door, take a moment. Look at the clothes you're putting on. Think about the tone of voice you're about to use. And ask yourself one last time, who wrote the script for the role you're playing today? And if you don't like the answer, well, it might be time to pick up a pen and start writing your own.